Welcome to A Matter of Class, an online learning experience for yoga teachers designed to build a more mindful and resilient yoga teacher practice. My name is Janelle Van Beek. I do business as Francie Van Workus, LLC. I'm the creator of this class and your facilitator. So if you're looking to grow your yoga teacher practice in a more mindful and resilient way, or perhaps you own a studio and are looking to improve the customer experience, you're in the right place. There are lots of continuing education classes out there for yoga teachers. It's big business. And so I'm grateful that you're here and that you've chosen this class. So as you progress through this class, I encourage you to use the participant guide that is connected with this course in Udemy. Print it out and have it nearby so that you can add your reflections when prompted to do so. It's not a requirement, but it will really help you stay focused. And speaking of focused, this is a very reflective class. And so it's not a class that you can just have running in the background while you're casually listening. It really demands your attention. And if you find you're too distracted some days, that's okay. Just close it and come back to it. That's the beauty of having a course on Udemy, is that you can stop and start again. And don't feel terrible or bad that you're not focused. Just pick it up again and reset and refresh your mind with starting over. So print your participant guide, relax, sit back, and enjoy. Continuing with our welcome and assuring you you are in the right place, I want to share my thoughts with you on why have a class about mindfulness for yoga teachers. Shouldn't we and they be mindful and be able to roll with things and draw on their training to deliver the most mindful and present class? Maybe. It's my experience, though, that as yoga becomes more accessible and there are classes in more places, we have classes on a greenway, a grassy lawn of a farmer's market, and in a gym with weights, and there's just so many expressions of yoga class, and there are an enormous amount of distractions and disruptions in our regular lives. And it seems as we move through the decade of the 2020s that humans are allowing more distraction into their lives than ever before. Right or wrong, good or bad, we have lots of distractions and disruptions. And because of that, and because of the things I've been experiencing in the recent past, I felt a calling, if you will, to share some thoughts on how to become a more resilient yoga teacher through mindfulness. And I think this class is a great way to either refresh a robust mindfulness practice that you may have, or to really pique your interest and get you started as a yoga teacher, building and growing your own resilience to create and offer better yoga teacher outcomes. And that means a better experience for all who are with you while you're on the mat. I encourage you to think about my class as an invitation, never an obligation. You're always invited to grow and become a more conscious and present yoga teacher. It's up to you. So just know that I'm not here to lecture, but to facilitate and invite in a creative way. Here's a little more about me. Since we're spending some time together, you already know why I made this class, and here's a little more about my context. So I have my yoga teacher certifications. I have a 75-hour Bikram, which is hot 26 and 2, yoga and nidra, And I also have 2 counselor certifications. Although I'm not a licensed therapist or counselor, I have a certification in as professional complex trauma counselor 1 and 2, and recently dialectical behavioral therapy with mindfulness. And these are great adjacent disciplines for my executive coaching business and for being a yoga teacher, something to consider. And I got those through PESI. I am not sponsored by them in any way, but it's PESI, great organization in Wisconsin, USA. I'm also a certified agency trainer and instructional designer. I've created many classes for businesses, leadership development courses, product technology, and I'm sharing my passion here in a new expression, and I'm looking forward to spending time with you. I'm also an endurance athlete. I've competed and completed in 9 Ironman triathlons and countless half Ironman triathlons. Let's take a look at the contents of this class. As always, you can follow along in your participant guide. We'll begin our class with a center and meditation moment, because that's what we're all about here. We want to make sure we're clear and open to what may arise as we discover this content. Next, we'll explore the many stances of a yoga teacher. And then we'll move on to more of mindfulness defined and actually the practice of watching the thinker. Next, we'll discover anti-patterns and patterns for yoga teachers. We won't cover them all, but we will address the big ones that are out there that are most common to most yoga teachers. And then we'll tackle those disruptions. Again, the most common ones that will build a foundation for us to be strong enough to endure any disruption that might happen. And then we will integrate, and you'll hear me say that a lot through this class, because I really want you to be able to apply what you're hearing and learning here. So we'll integrate all of these concepts and develop some optional homework for you. And then we'll close out the class. Let's look at the learning objectives for this class. We've been hinting at them so far, but let's go into the specifics. So by learning the stances of a yoga teacher, you'll raise awareness of the most conscious ways to hold space in your classes. And we'll learn how our brains often get in the way of what we want to accomplish, which is mindfully teaching a yoga class, and how we can change that through practice. And then we'll look at those common anti-patterns and patterns for yoga teachers, so that you can begin to practice ways to remain conscious and focused in class. And then we'll integrate how to apply mindful yoga teacher patterns into a customer-focused experience. Let's take a moment to center ourselves for our time together. This class is all about being in the present moment and learning to avoid unconscious reactions. It starts here now with our intentional pause to center. Let's practice mind sweep. This is a personal exercise that you won't have to share with anyone else. Find something to write with, whatever you choose, and find some paper. Use your participant guide. There's a specific section for this. And no worries if you haven't printed your participant guide. A sticky note will work just as well. So once you have those things set aside within your reach, sit or stand with a tall spine. Invitation to close your eyes. Take a long, slow, Deep breath through your nose. Fill the lungs with air. And as they become as full as they can be, pause for 3, 2, 1. Then exhale out through the mouth. And continue on with the natural rhythm of your breath. If you close your eyes, please open them. Now, think about anything that might hold you back from giving your full attention to this class. Take a virtual or imaginary broom and sweep all of those things onto your paper and out of your mind. So find your writing device and write all the things that might hold you back from giving your full attention to this class onto your paper in your participant guide. Don't judge the things you write. Just write all of them, free flow, not to be shared with anyone else. Okay, if you're still writing, pause this video and continue on, but no longer than another 30 seconds. Okay, so now set the paper or side or move on to the next section in your participant guide, because you've swept your mind of distraction, and those things that list or lists will be there for you later when you finish this class. You're now ready to begin. Also, if you plan to take parts of this class over a string of days, feel free to come back to the center exercise, the mind sweep, and practice it again to better prepare you for focusing on the content here today. That list will be waiting for you later. The many stances of a yoga teacher. Regardless of how many hours of yoga teacher training and education you've had, it seems we can't get enough of practice and reflection in how we hold space in a room as a teacher, and even how we hold space in a studio before class and after class. This section really dives into the different stances or positions that a yoga teacher has when they're interacting with the customer, we'll call yogis and yoginis. You may not think everyone deserves the yogi yogini expertise title. It's how I was raised in my studio of teacher training at Inner Fire Studio in Madison, Wisconsin. We were using those words, and I like that. Let's assume everyone's an expert in breath and movement. Okay, the first thing about this topic, well, actually the second thing, we've been talking about it here, is that teaching well really is intentional. And I believe all of us do have the best intentions to deliver a wonderful class that helps our yogis and yoginis get what they're looking for out of the class. Yet, holding space is only part of that, but it is a big part of it. And how a teacher is present in the room, in the studio, can really impact that experience. And so you'll see throughout this section, I'm using this image as to represent the yogi and yogini experience. It's at the center of all we do. We are there for them. Without them, we wouldn't have a job, most likely. Yoga would be there for us, but we wouldn't be teaching it like we are. So always remembering to go back to the yogi and yogini when you're feeling a little turned around about some of these concepts. I also like the idea of something circular here. It's not really a mandala or representing of that, but I do like the circular view of the experience in that there are many things that our yogis and yoginis come in for yoga. And that's one of the reasons we ask them to set an intention at the beginning of their class, or we invite them to, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, mental combination, because we know that it's a holistic thing that we're after. So the yoga teacher stance, probably the most obvious and might even sound a little redundant, but stick with me. There are many teacher stances. Let's start with something familiar. In this, we're looking at what most of us probably have been trained in the most through our education and classes and things we read. It's mostly in this stance. Example would be in our centering exercise. Sit with a tall spine. Draw your palms together at heart center. Those are all teaching moments. And another example would be looking to get people efficiently and safely in and out of an asana. That is absolutely a teaching stance. So with each of these stances, I'm going to ask you to pause the video and take just 2 to 5 minutes, depending on your thoughts with the stance. The teacher one might only take you 30 seconds, but just write down in that participant guide, is this a challenging stance for you? And then why? Why is this one challenging to you? And then, right, because we're talking about focusing and being resilient in our class, what holds back your focus from being in the teacher stance? For example, for me, one of the things that can hold me back from my focus in the teacher stance is too much concern about left and right. Just as an example, that's my thing. It might not be yours. See you in the next section. Our second yoga teacher stance is pseudo-therapist. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I have a few therapy certifications, but I am technically not a therapist. But it seems that sometimes when I'm teaching yoga, once again, I'm being confused for a therapist. So grounding you again, the center focus here is the yogi yogini experience. And these are the teacher stances going around that experience that support it and nourish it. Often yogis or yoginis are practicing for some sort of healing and for the mindful properties that yoga evokes. And sometimes you are the frontline person as a yoga teacher for this experience in therapy. Yoga is therapy. An example of this might be that someone wants to share a difficult situation with you that your classes have helped them through, or maybe they're coming to you for the first time and saying, I've been through some really rocky blah, 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 like whatever it is, and I'm here to start my practice. What can I do? What should I not do? You just never know what someone's going to ask you as a yoga teacher. And in this pseudo-therapist stance, it's really important to bring your curiosity so you can really hear what they're asking, and of course your empathy. There is something to be said that a person can be empathetic but not curiously listening. So you can still, feel soft with them, or compassionate, but I'm really challenging this stance to be curious and to listen, because what you don't want to do is end up in a situation where you're acting as a therapist, but rather keeping the stance of a pseudo-therapist. And do no harm. As a yoga teacher, even though we didn't take an oath, it's important to think about this. One example is someone saying, I broke up with my fiance 3 weeks ago, and I've been coming to yoga, and it's really helping me. And you can dig in a little bit depending on how well you know this person. Like, well, what about yoga is helping you with that? Tell me more about your journey. Those are curiosities that show that you're listening and that you care. And then there's also people that they don't want you to dig into it. The vibe. You have to be listening, though, to feel it, hear it, and see it. When to ask questions like that, as opposed to someone who's just casually saying, gosh, this has helped me so much, thank you. It's my honor to be your guide, your teacher, or whatever stance you want to offer. It's my honor to be here for you. Another one that comes up is really common is someone saying they had an experience with a particular asana, like camel, Ustrasana, big back bend and heart opener, and sometimes can just really release stuff, or at least start to release things that can be very powerful, and powerful in a good way or in a negative way, or maybe like it's negative because the journey is to let go of something that's really hard to let go of. Another example might be after practicing camel, Ustrasana, I had this amazing opening. And you as the instructor, the teacher, can use your teacher stance and your therapist stance to say, yes, it's a big back bend and heart opener. And sometimes things are released or stirred up to be released. They're poised to someday be released by you. That can be a very rich conversation. And if you have resources in the studio, such as books, you can show them something about that asana or tell them they might want to learn it on their own. Maybe. And so even while teaching, another thing of this therapist stance is that you could have someone who's having an experience during class where you can see they're in tears, they might even be crying, and you may need to use that stance to change your class for a moment so that you can quickly triage that yogi or yogini. It depends on your studio and the policies and the philosophy there. And it also depends very much on the context of the moment. Just because someone is crying or in tears doesn't mean you need to stop class and feel like you're assisting them in some way. But there are moments where you may notice, if you are very present, that something is needed at that moment. Usually, simple, comforting words to someone are enough. If you can, at all costs, try to avoid saying, "Are you okay?" Clearly, they're not okay, or they wouldn't be crying in a public yoga class. Something interesting is happening, something deep. So you already know the answer to, "Are you okay?" So this is where your reflection might help to develop the right words or response that you would consider should someone need a moment of comfort. And sometimes it can just be a hand on a shoulder if you know them. But again, it depends on the studio, because some studios, yoga teachers aren't touching clients. I understand the spectrum of what we're talking about here. So that's why the pseudo therapist stance can be a very, very nuanced stance. But I really believe it's important to talk about it with your colleagues, your yoga studio owner, and just ask them what their take is on this stance. Maybe even have them take this class. But if someone were having a moment in class, usually let it pass. When do you know it's something you need to pause to triage? It's worth a great discussion. Okay, speaking of reflection and discussing and considering, let's do the reflection for this stance by looking at pausing the video and taking 2 minutes to look at, is this a challenging stance for you and why? And then also, like, what holds back your focus from this stance? And I'll see you in the next section. coach stance. As you went through your yoga teacher training, you probably had a lot of work on physical cues and the benefits and being able to cue the energy cues and the mindfulness part of it, but also physical. And why are we doing it that way? That is the coaching stance, encouraging yogis and yoginis to persevere, and then sharing why they're doing it the way it's happening, like why we do this. An example in the coaching stance might be Ardha Chandrasana, side moon, whatever you want to call it. I call it Ardha Chandrasana. An example would be cueing to inhale with a tall spine and exhale, side bend to the right. And talking about alignment there. So coaching gives alignment cues and saying, look, shoulders and hips are in line with each other, not because it looks good, but because you're getting the benefits of the spine stretch and we're opening side body. The other part of this is that encouragement, and that you can tailor, customize to your students as you know them well. And some people like to be called out and encouraged in class, others would rather not. So you really need to know your yogis and yoginis well. And if you don't know them, then use caution and just offer general perseverance cues. And being curious, I was in a class recently where there was quite a complicated flow happening. It was a very fascinating class. And at one point, the yoga teacher said something about the flow and said, "Are you getting it?" And it might not have been my word choice, but she was trying to see if they were understanding what they were doing. And one person in the room said, "No." And it was a male in a group where there were just a few males and many females in the class. And he was courageous enough to say no. And that yoga teacher did not address that. So she fell out of the coach stance. She wanted to know if everyone was okay and following along, but when there was a challenge, it wasn't accepted for whatever reason. It didn't seem like the no was sarcastic or playful in any way. So speaking of playful, my last point on this is the coach can have a coach stance, have a playful side to it, to encourage the playfulness of yoga. I had someone who just would say, yep, don't take yourself too seriously. It's yoga. And like, yoga takes you the way you are. Let's be curious. Find your voice to offer playfulness if it fits your studio's philosophy. So that's the coach stance. So now what I'd like you to do is take 2 minutes to pause again and reflect on the challenges for you in the coach stance and why. And then, of course, like what might hold you back in the coach stance. And I'll see you in the next section. The next yoga teacher stance is safety officer. Now, yoga is thought to be a safe place for healing and unplugging from the world for mind and body, and yet safety is definitely a concern. And whether you are the business owner of the studio or a teacher representing the studio, safety is something to really take seriously and have a stance for it. That yoga teacher needs to uphold that safe place, whether it is psychological safety or actual physical safety. Now, I'm not saying that you become a police officer and you have to, defend until you're in physical danger. If things like that come up, you need to have a plan with your studio on how to address them quickly. So I want to give you an example of the stance. Would be something really simple is protection of valuables. Where to keep them. Some studios, there aren't a lot of locked places or secure places. So new students might not know that. And so just sharing with them, you might want to keep your valuables in your car, or maybe it's a place where you don't want to keep your valuables in the car. But just giving them as much help as you can so that they can make a decision on where to put their wallet, their purse, how much to bring in the studio, and where to put it in the studio. Always lock the door is another example, like before class, if you're the only person in the studio, you're going to lock the door before you walk into the studio so that everything is secure. And this is important, is to know how to exit the building and know how to help others do it in emergency. Most of the time when we're hired for yoga teacher training, for being a yoga teacher, we don't think about, would I have to escort people out safely? Where would that be? It's really something to consider, and have a conversation with your studio owner about these things. Again, this is all about raising the level of experience for the yogi and yogini, the center of all we do. Upholding the rules of the house, if you will, about like, well, how long can someone remain in the studio before or after class? There have been people who want to bring someone with them to the studio, but they're not going to take the class, whether it's a friend, a child, a sibling. There are rules that fall in the safety category about who can be in the studio while there's a class going on. Hot yoga. There can be dangers of tripping with puddles of sweat. Now, if you've never taught hot yoga in a 104 or 105 degree room, I encourage you to go find one of those classes. And everyone sweats at a different pace, and sweat is going to be a topic throughout this yoga teacher stance section. There is a hazard when someone has a large puddle around their mat, and depending on the level of the floor, that puddle might be turning into a small river. And it could be during class, or it could be they're dragging their sweaty things out of the room and they're making a trail behind them. That's a security issue. I should say a safety issue, not a security issue, where people could totally slip and fall on someone else's sweat. How to address that is up to you and the studio. And above all, keeping the yoga experience of your yogis and yoginis at the center. If there's an unsavory or unpleasant behavior happening in your class, you need to stop the class immediately. And again, this is something to talk about with your studio. Never should there be something that disrupts the yoga experience so poorly that people's safety, psychological or physical, is in jeopardy. You want people to be safe to have this healing experience happen. I wish we didn't have to have this stance in this topic, but it is something that is part of being in this world with all kinds of humans. Okay, so time to reflect. Use your participant guide, pause this video, and reflect, and then write down, what is this a challenging stance for you, and why? And what might get in the way of you holding this stance? An example that I had for what could hold me back from this is I wasn't always able to see or meet with my yoga studio owner, and asking questions became like I had to be more direct with it. So what I learned is, I have a safety and well-being question for you. And then when the word safety came up, then I was able to access the owner right away and have that discussion. So pause, reflect, look at the stance, and really think about it. The stance of keeper of the environment. This was a late add to my class, thanks to a dear friend of mine who shared an experience with me that made me pause and think of how a yoga teacher might be able to be a keeper of the environment in the yoga studio and in the classroom. Now, I understand the yoga teacher can't be everywhere all the time. So wherever the yoga teacher is, they can be in the stance of keeper of the environment as needed. So my friend's story was how she was at a studio that allows yogis and yoginis to be in the studio ahead of time, just for 15, 20 minutes. And so there are people in this classroom ahead of time, and she was one of them. And she's reflecting, and it's very quiet. And then someone walked in and just slapped their mat down, and then their friend joined them next to them and unrolled their mat with a flap. And then the two of them started talking before class. It completely popped the meditative, mindful bubble that the other yogis and yoginis were jamming on before these two new arrivals have showed up. And I agree with my friend that could have been very distracting. And while there's no teacher in the room at that moment, that is definitely an environmental issue that a teacher can have a stance there and encourage the behavior that supports the philosophy of that studio. Okay, so this topic builds on the last one of physical safety, and that a yoga teacher should aim to uphold the environment of the yoga studio. And again, talk with your yoga studio owner, or if you're the owner, have some reflection time and talk with your stakeholders about what kind of environment do you want to have in the studio entryway, before class, after class. Maybe talking and noise is okay beforehand, but after class in Shavasana and leaving the room, it needs to be quiet. Every studio is different. Have those conversations. The moment the yogi or yogini enters the studio, they notice these things. They notice the music, the lighting, the desk presence, all of these things. Again, the center of what we're doing is their experience. So anything impacting their five senses, even such as burning incense or some kind of music, might impact their experience in a negative way. We can't please everyone, but having those reflections on what are the things we want to please most of the people with can really go a long way in improving your stance as a teacher and the yogi yogini experience. So this example I gave you at the beginning, like put yourselves in those shoes, well, your bare feet, put yourself on the mat in that room ahead of time, ahead of class. So just put yourself into one of those yogis or yoginis who came in, let's say it's an after work class, and you had, traffic, I call it red light day, where every single opportunity for a red light became a red light, and maybe you had a difficult day at work, or maybe every day is a challenge at work, and you just crave your time on the yoga mat. So there you are, moments before class, and then that bubble of peace is popped by two new arrivals who are talking, and they're just, probably well-intended individuals, but they have no concept of what they've done to the environment. The yoga teacher, again, we're not asking you to patrol the area, but if you're seeing it or you've heard feedback, there's nothing wrong with, before class starts, to remind people that we end the class in silence. Please respect your fellow yogis and yoginis. There's all kinds of gentle words you can use to invite people to leave quietly, or whatever it is you want them to do. Preserve the peacefulness of the studio prior to class. Again, these things are slightly out of your control, and yet there are many things you can guide to and work toward over time. And you'll find that most people they don't want to be the one who's standing out and making noise and being a distraction. In a yoga studio anyway, they definitely want to do the right thing, and they just need a little peaceful, gentle reminder. And sometimes it needs to be more forceful depending on the situation. And most likely, whether it's peaceful or forceful, it will have to be repeated. For now, pause and do your reflection. What makes this stance challenging for you? Why is keeper in the environment challenging for you? And then what holds you back from being keeper of the environment? And what I don't want is to say, well, because I'm not there. I'm like, what holds you back when you have an opportunity to be in the stance of keeper in the environment? What might hold you back there? And if nothing holds you back and you've done a marvelous job with it, I love it. Great work. The cashier or front desk yoga teacher stance. This may be one of the more challenging stances for yoga teachers because, let's face it, the healing properties of yoga are in direct collision with the business of yoga and keeping the studio afloat and profitable. The business of yoga sometimes involves those pesky 10, 20, 30 packs where there's a membership, but then there's also these certificates that people might have for, I have 30 pack class. And boy, those can get really confusing to some of the yogis and yoginis, whether it's intentional or truly is confusing to them. The perfect world is that you don't have to be the yoga teacher and the desk or cashier person on the same day. But let's face it, the world is not perfect, and oftentimes you may be doing both of those roles. And so the stance of cashier or front desk is real and can be very disruptive to your teaching practice. And you may be, the other thing is you're doing 2 jobs at yoga, and you may have other jobs outside of being a yoga teacher. And so you've left that, and now you're coming into the studio and you've got to be the front desk cashier, and you're going to go teach a class. It can be a lot, and it's very easy to lose the mindfulness and presence that a yoga teacher wants and needs to have and great outcomes for their class. You will talk with your studio to understand the philosophy, but for the sake of this class, I would say that a cashier and front desk stance needs to be polite and yet firm. For example, the yogi thought there was 1 class left in the 10 pack, but all the digital records, show that this person used their last class 2 weeks ago. Okay, the yogi saying one thing, the digital record is showing something completely different, and now things are escalating a little bit. So the person is in disbelief, grumbles a little bit, and then ultimately buys a new 10 pack. You know that this person is likely, you've seen it before. Usually these folks who are looking for the free class, there's a pattern of them feigning that they've, have 1 or 2 classes left when they've used them all up. It just seems to repeat itself. And then there's the honest mistake where someone really did think, and they just, well, okay, I guess I'm going to buy another one. And you, in holding the stance, when you're polite yet firm, because you need to keep the studio productive and profitable. It could be very easy to say, well, I'll sort it out later. You just don't worry about it. Talk with your studio owner, make sure you've got the right policy so that these things don't slip through the cracks. The other thing is the repeat offender is going to make a big deal out of pulling the credit card out, handing it to you. Or cash, usually it's a credit card though, and you're going to run the payment through. And this is the moment where, when you're in the cashier and front desk stance, you do not need to say anything else about what has transpired, about the yogi's frustration or anger even that you can feel oozing across the desk to you. The only other thing you could say is, I would be happy to do this transaction, and that it's complete, and then thanking them and giving them the receipt if they want it. They'll probably rip the credit card out of their hand, shove it back in their wallet in anger. But ultimately, you're going to be in your class shortly. And so you're in this polite yet firm space that still enables you to walk into the room later in a present yoga teacher stance of choice, depending on what it is. It won't be cashier, but having this stance in a place where you've reflected on it and you know how to work in it can really help in these tense situations. And if you have any great cashier or front desk stories you want to share with me, I would love to hear them. And we can all silently hope that people who are this upset about miscalculating their 10-pack or their 30-pack, a yoga class is just what they need. So take time to reflect now. Look in your participant guide for this section. Is this a challenging stance for you, and why? And then what holds you back? What gets in the way of you being in this stance in the most effective way you can? See you in the next section. The mom or dad stance. Once again, taking a look at this image in front of us, we've got the yogi and yogini experience in the middle. We might be wondering, how the heck does mom or dad as a stance come into play? And maybe if you've worked in a hot yoga studio, you might have some ideas. Often in a studio of any kind, yogis and yoginis can forget that they are responsible for cleaning up after themselves. They're responsible for their own presence in the studio. They don't need to make much effort to be neat or tidy or considerate of others. And in the same way, parents encourage their children to clean up after themselves, to be responsible for themselves, so that someday they grow up to be a responsible, organized human being. That's the plan anyway, the hope. And this could be in any yoga studio. I'm using an example of a hot yoga studio, true story. You were the hot yoga teacher, and as you're leaving the room after class, you notice one yogi or yogini has left a large puddle of sweat around their mat in the yoga room. They had just one small towel on their mat, and they were a large person, muscular, and there's sweat all over the mat. The other way of looking at it is that is an enormous amount of body fluid or biohazard on the floor in this classroom. And so after class, you politely ask this person, I noticed there are large puddles of sweat around your mat. Could you please wipe them? I have a towel for you to use. So this is done in a quiet way, pulling aside the person. You're even using one of the studio towels to offer to them. That usually doesn't happen, but you're trying to make this as easy as possible to fulfill the request you have, which is to clean up after themselves. The person looks at you in shock at first, and then turns to anger and says, who's responsible to clean that room? And this is a place where things can get unpleasant really fast, or frightening for you if you're not used to conflict or whatever. But I just think it can go south or go unpleasant really fast. So my encouragement is to stick to the high road and be persistently polite. So cashier was polite and firm. This is persistent is probably another word for firm here as well, but persistently polite. It'd be really easy to say something back to this person about their mother or father and teaching them to clean up. What I would recommend is something like, I'm asking you to please use these house towels to wipe up your puddles of sweat. You can use the bin over there for the used towels. And then the person says back to you with that same anger, I shouldn't have to do this. I'm not responsible for that mess in there. That's your job. Sir, it's your sweat, please. Because the person's still standing there, angry, and you're still holding the towel, please. So the person huffed and puffed and ripped the towel out of my hand and went to go clean it up, returned it to the towel bin, and that was the end of it. He definitely left in a huff. I had a high heart rate for a while, I'm not kidding, and it wasn't just because I was teaching in a 104-degree room. It was because I was being courageous, I was being firm, polite, and I was getting all this anger back at me, all this pushback. But I knew it was the right stance to hold, because we can't have people leaving big messes of their own body fluids on the floor. It's just not acceptable. The thing about it is that a few weeks later, I didn't see that person for a while. And the next time they came back in, this person apologized to me and said, "Hey, I'm really sorry I talked to you like that. That was out of line. It felt good." I still wasn't completely comfortable around this person because he was very angry at first, the first time. All is well. Another example of this mom or dad stance is when you see someone just discarding trash or leaving something laying around. Another hot yoga example is the person who did bring towels, but it wasn't enough. And now they're walking out of the studio, or they rented a towel and it's dripping and it's leaving this trail of body fluids from the yoga studio all the way to where the towel bin is, not to mention the nice little wet slap it makes at the bottom of the yoga towel bin. But anyway, so now we have this big river. Again, it's a safety hazard and it's a biohazard. And so handing that person a towel and asking them, "Looks like you left a big trail of your sweat." And I think it's okay to say your sweat. It's all in the polite, invitational way. "Would you please use our house towel to clean the floor so that people don't slip on your sweat? Thank you." And then being very grateful. Don't overdo, like, "Oh, I'm so glad," don't talk about how distasteful the job is to clean up after people. That is not the point of the stance. It's just inviting people to be responsible for their own existence in the studio and in the classroom. So time to reflect on the stance and take a few minutes, pause the video, and really reflect on this mom or dad stance, and really encouraging people to who are likely repeat offenders, but who are not conscious of the imprint they're leaving on the studio. And just look at what gets in the way of that and why. So what's the challenge with this? Why is it a challenge? What are the things in the way of you holding this stance? And maybe you're thinking, "Oh, thank goodness I don't ever have to deal with that. I don't really have this stance to use very often." Well, that's great too. And still reflect on it though, because you may run into it at some time in the future. See you in the next section. The yoga teacher stance of divine loving human. We could have an entire class on any of these stances, including this one. Remembering the yogi or yogini experience at the center of all we do, and how the stance of being a divine loving human comes into play. Yoga teacher training, when you had it, illuminated the idea that the path of yoga leads us to the sacred connection of our true self and the divine energy of the universe. I know that's a mouthful when I was reading it to you, but it's really important. So I want to share that again. The path of yoga leads us to the sacred connection of our true self and the divine energy of the universe. So there's potential in every part of the human system to become attuned to its essence, the conscious seer within. So again, really deep topic, but that's what I'm talking about when I say divine loving human. Yogis and yoginis need to see us as teachers of this, that we are a light for them to either begin their journey, continue their journey, to whatever it is they're seeking. As a yoga teacher, the divine loving human shows up as patience, grace, polite. You can be firm, as we've discussed in previous stances, and yet uphold the environment of the studio. So like you can be firm with asking someone to clean up their sweat and still be a divine loving human. And it worked out well in the last example, where I'm not saying I as a teacher was perfect. I was a little shaky while this person was yelling at me about, it's my responsibility to clean up his sweat. But I was patient with him and persistent with my message. And he also, at some point, recognized he's a divine loving human, because the next time I saw him in class or come into the studio, he apologized. And so I'm pretty sure if I would have been something other than the mom or dad stance, I probably would not have evoked that divine loving human out of him. And I certainly wouldn't have been holding that stance at that time. And that would steal from the whole intent of yoga. So there are no regrets on how you hold space if you're doing it from the position of a divine loving human. There are all kinds of heat moments that we've shared up until now, or that we've discussed. And if you're not sure about a stance or the right words, going back to the yogi yogini experience in the middle, and also divine loving human, might be a great place to start. It's not the only place, but it's a really solid foundation for you. And another example, like if we could rewind to the yoga sweat anger situation, not my responsibility to clean up my sweat. If the next time I saw that person, another thing I could have done was had a towel ready for him. If he wouldn't have apologized, like if he would have just come in and whatever, I could have offered him 2 house towels, kind of like a peace offering. It all depends on the situation. I know with this person, I could have done that, and I would have felt like I was being a divine loving human, and also a little bit keeper of the environment, and a little bit mom, like, here's your towel, honey, without saying it like that, of course. Don't forget your towels. Divine loving human, remembering the purpose of yoga. Maybe once a month, it wouldn't hurt to go back to reading something like that big statement I read at the beginning about the path of yoga leading us to sacred connection. Like, what is sacred connection to you? It's probably not the same as it is for every other yoga teacher. And just reflecting on those things will really help you connect to this and be more intentional. So speaking of reflection, take a pause, stop the video, and write what is challenging about being a divine loving human as a yoga teacher states. And it's okay for this to be a challenge. We work with a lot of different kinds of people. We are humans. We've had challenging days, and we have to show up and deliver a quality, wonderful yoga class experience for people. And it can be very hard some days. And why is that? So taking a look at why that is, and then what are the things that might get in the way? As with all of these stances, things that might get in the way can be things in your control and things outside of your control. All I ask is that before you identify it as being out of your control, that you really think about that, and then reflect on, well, what can I own? What is in my control? See you in the next section. The yoga teacher stance of guide. It's our last stance that we will discover today. With the yogi and yogini experience in the center of this image and in the center of all we do, these are the major stances that I believe help us to offer the best experience in the most mindful and resilient way for any disruptions or distractions that might happen during class or in our lives that impact us during class. So as a guide, going back to that path of sacred connection to true self, guide is another place that's very close, and you can see it's in between teacher and divine loving human. That was intentional to some degree. There are nuances between these, but the stance that this is taking is that you are learning yoga. You are a student of yoga, just as those you are teaching are. We are learning together, we're being curious together, we're being playful together, and I am your guide. And as a guide, you're not attached to specific outcomes. Okay, safety and efficiency perhaps, and the environment, but the outcomes of, that person didn't do a very good job with their Dandayamana Dhanurasana. their standing bow pulling pose, or their cobras they're pushing too much up with their hands. The guide is just learning and journeying along with. And so this stance can be very important in your class to help people remember that they're not there to please you. They're only there to learn and develop and heal themselves, and you're guiding them in that. An example of this could be a yogi or yogini who, after class, asks you about the history of a particular asana. Like, how did that come about? And you don't know the answer because yoga is a ginormous topic and you know a lot of things, but you don't know that specific one. And it is okay to not know the answer. It's also encouraged to say, that's a really good question. Let's use one of the books in the studio to look it up and see what we can find out. Or if you can stick around until I'm done with this transaction, I can research it online and we can look at it together. So that takes all you're not feeling bad because you don't know the answer. You're not attached to being an expert. You are being a guide at that point. Well, let's find out. So that's the guide stance. At this point, pause your video, take a few moments and reflect on the nuance of being a guide. And maybe you even use the words at the end of your yoga classes. It's been my honor to be your guide. And if you don't, that's okay. I'm just saying we have this in our DNA to be a guide. So explore what is challenging about this stance for you and why in your participant guide. And then also write what gets in the way of this. Don't worry if you don't have anything specific here again, but just really take some time and reflect and why is this a challenge for me? What's getting in the way that I can control? So we talked about that in the past, like in your control, outside of your control. See what's there. I'll see you in the next section. Let's take what we've learned and discovered in the many stances of the yoga teacher and put those into practice. And I know that might be easier said than done. Use your participant guide, and above all, use reflection. So at this point, I'd like you to pause again and think about what was present for you after we reviewed these stances. And just make note of that. And you might think of some challenging or negative situations. That's okay. You might think of some things you did really well. It doesn't always have to be an event that you did or did not deliver. It's just what is present with you, what's arising, what are the thoughts you have on this content, and really just take a moment and write them in your guide. For homework, as an invitation, the next time you attend a yoga class as a student, whether it's in person or online, I want you to enjoy your class and then also notice the different stances your yoga teacher has taken or used. And do it without judgment. Just do the homework to notice them and reflect on them. And there are some prompts in your participant guide about this homework. And we also have, at the end of this entire participant guide, this homework will show up again. So don't worry if you think you'll forget that it's buried in this section. I think this is a really powerful exercise to apply what we're doing in a way when you are not on stage, when you are the student, so that you can observe and see what else is happening. And you might have done this in the past for your yoga teacher training, attend class and answer some prompts about it. This is a really great tool. So time to practice that again. This section is about mindfulness and the practice of watching the thinker. It's if you see it in your participant guide, mindfulness is the main focus of this section. And let's face it, we could have an entire class on this topic. And it's true that as yoga teachers who've gone through at least 200 hours of yoga teacher training, maybe 500, maybe more than that, that we should be students of mindfulness and have a real good sense for it and practice it. The reality of that is not always the case. And so the purpose of this section is twofold. One is to level set on mindfulness for the sake of this class. And the other part of that is to create an invitation to you to rekindle your mindfulness practice or interest in studying it, and to give you a few tools to do that. In fact, two tools, and one of them is watching the thinker. So I invite you to just take a look at your participant guide for the definition that I chose for mindfulness. I'm going to read it to you because I believe it is powerful. And again, it's not the only definition because mindfulness is a huge topic, but it's one that I recently encountered and I liked it. I was in a mindfulness class associated with a dialectical behavioral therapy class that combines the methods of dialectical behavioral therapy with mindfulness. And although the mindfulness section in that class didn't knock my socks off, the definition was worthy of sharing here. So take a look in your participant guide, and if you don't have that with you, just close your eyes or write some notes, however you listen actively about the definition of mindfulness. This is from Quaglia, Brown, Lindsay, Cresswell, and Goodman in 2014. Mindfulness is a capacity to openly attend with awareness to what is happening in one's present moment experience. Mindfulness is a direct taking notice of what is happening right now, regardless of whether one's experience is positive, negative, or neutral. Mindfulness is about inviting in experience with curiosity and interest. There's 1, 2, 3 sentences. I think the first 2 sentences could stand alone, each of them on defining mindfulness. And the last sentence is sort of an add-on. Another way to look at this, and I've used this with conferences, is to define the present moment with my 2 hands and say, okay, many parts of our day, the present moment is a very small space of our focus. There's a whole bunch over here on the one side that's about events that have happened in the past, that day, 3 minutes ago. And there's all the space on the other side of it of things that may happen in the future, even if we think we're very certain they're going to happen, they're in the future. And what happens is our brains, literally our brains, not our minds so much, but our brains get stuck on what's happened and recycles on that and what's going to happen. And they crush the present moment. This brain grabbing onto these moments, past and present, or past and future, crushes the present and makes it this very small space. Mindfulness is the practice of muscling, pushing out, and making more space for the present moment. It doesn't mean that these events on either side are not important. That's another discussion. They likely aren't as important as what's in your present moment. And because our attention is normally drawn away, we're left with not much of a present moment. And what happens? We become unconscious. And as a yoga teacher, we are human. We can still fall for that trap, that sense of, well, these things are far more important than being mindful or reflective. Might be a place to pause and look at your participant guide and answer the 2 questions that are there. What is mindfulness in your words? take my words, take the words of the professionals I shared with you, but what is it in your words? The other question in your participant guide is, why would a yoga teacher focus on this? Isn't yoga itself mindful? And watching the thinker is all about the concept of the fact that you are not your brain. Your brain is an organ in your body. And the moment we realize that our brain is separate from our body, it's the beginning of freedom. And so here's a quote from Eckhart Tolle. The beginning of freedom is a realization that you are not the thinker. Okay, so I'm going to step back because this is a tool. It's only a tool, one of many out there. I feel it's a very easy one to grasp for yoga teachers. And because I think some yoga teachers may have had exposure to this. Understanding that we are not our brains. Our brain is an organ like a heart, lungs, and the brain loves to take over and control everything. The truth is, it doesn't have to be that way. We are humans. We have a divine aspect to us, and our mind is not our brain. So when we are watching the thinker, we're looking at how we're processing things in the present moment. So that's the highlights of watching the thinker. I invite you to take a look more at Eckhart Tolle's work on this, and even in the book, The Power of Now, which is all about making space, making that present moment larger than the other parts of our thoughts. Let's take a look at our second tool to help practice mindfulness, which is called integral theory. And you'll see this in your participant guide. I know you might be thinking, okay, this doesn't look that easy. It's a quadrant with a bunch of words and there's writing on the sides and there's a link on the bottom. Well, okay, the link on the bottom is just the resource of where this is from. Wilber's integral theory quadrants are divided in half. So the side on the left, where it says interior in white, in the white band with the teal writing, things that are on the interior of what a person is thinking or experiencing. And then on the right, in the white band with the teal writing, it says exterior. And these are things others might be thinking. Looking at the first quadrant in the upper left, I is the subjective. It is the objective on the upper right corner. And then down below, we, the intersubjective, and in the lower right, it's the interobjective. So let's use an example to make this make sense. Let's say you are instructing a class and you're cueing Dandayamana Dhanurasana and you fall over. Or maybe that's happened to you in triangle. Maybe your legs were tired from a hike or whatever. Sometimes yoga teachers breathe wrong as well, and we can fall over. So let's use that example of falling over, or maybe falling to the point like you didn't hurt yourself, but you had to take a big step, and it was very noticeable as a teacher. In this example, the I is the body itself. So again, drawing a quadrant, looking at what happened. Well, in that first quadrant, I had nerves and sensations. I might have had pain if I actually hurt myself in some way. Hopefully nothing serious. So again, this is the thoughts, the emotions, the memories, the real physical body feeling. Well, what's on the right of that? The objective part. This is my feelings about what I'm experiencing. I might feel embarrassed. I might feel sad that I'm in pain. Things like that. Then there's the lower left corner. What society thinks about yoga teachers who fall. What is that? Is there judgment on that? And then the last one is the collective thing, the systems, the integrated things that might be affected by this. For example, in the case of a yoga teacher falling out of an asana,
it might disturb the equilibrium of the room and cause others to lose their balance as well. Hopefully the whole room isn't tumbling over like a stack of dominoes, but people fall out of the asana, and hopefully the teacher is using one of their stances, maybe the coach stance, to, if you fall out, just get back in. What I'm sharing here is just an example of how to use this integral theory quadrant to look back and reflect on a situation, to approach it in a more mindful way. Let's say there was an interaction you had with a client or one of your yogis and yoginis, and you want to really take apart or unpack what happened. You can use this in a relationship situation, a professional work situation as well. And the example here is very simple. Sometimes they're more complex. And if you're struggling to work with this tool, first of all, it may not be the tool for you. Also, the problem might need to be broken down into a smaller part to be usable here. Just an example of how a person can take apart a situation and look at, okay, what am I really feeling here? What am I really thinking? Do I care too much about what society thinks about this? Is there some systemic thing that is a result of this? Just look at it. An invitation to try it. For integration, meaning how are we going to pull together what we learned here in a short amount of time on mindfulness with the real world? The first point is that we really have a tendency to get in our own way when teaching yoga. And that might be your answer to that second prompt in the participant guide, that a yoga teacher needs to practice mindfulness because humans have brains that get in the way of being a present human in teaching and in life. We can use the different stances of being a yoga teacher to provide the best experience possible. So if we pair knowing our stances and being cognizant and mindful of them, along with mindfulness practices, you don't have to use the tools, just practice mindfulness enough to use the tools, or enough to use the stances and the mindfulness practice, you will be a far more resilient and present yoga teacher. We can train ourselves to be more mindful as yoga teachers and in our life. Maybe this class is inspiring enough to see that a level of consciousness that you could achieve might be far higher or far more involved than you ever imagined when you first signed up to go to yoga teacher training, or to teach at your studio, or to open your studio. There's so many times we get wrapped up in the business of yoga, and with mindfulness, we can draw upon that side that sometimes gets shut out, but it takes practice. And when we do that, and we are reaching a higher level of consciousness, that will help us move from one yoga teacher stance to another far more smoothly than without.
Section 3, anti-patterns and patterns of yoga teaching. So we've looked at the foundation, teacher stances around the yogi-yogini experience. We've woven mindfulness through it, and now we're going to apply those to some common patterns and anti-patterns. We can't touch on every anti-pattern or pattern that's out there, so I'm offering you some of the most common ones, and from there you can apply what we've learned to any nuanced anti-patterns to create healthy patterns, good ones for great teacher outcomes in your classes. The first one in your participant guide as well, anti-pattern of apology. And the asterisk, usually this is in a breathless, rushed speech. Inhale, reverse warrior. Oh, sorry, reverse triangle. Step forward into low lunge. Oh, sorry, I forgot to do half moon on the left side. We're going to pause what we're doing and go back and do half moon. Or even just the simple left arm lifts. Right. I'm so sorry. And the other one in that breathless voice, walking into the yoga studio 2 minutes after the time it's supposed to start. right or wrong. Sorry, I'm late. We had a late check-in and they needed to register with the studio. Okay, let's get started. Standing in the middle of your mat. I'm not going to pick on the breathless, rushed speech at this moment. It's all about the apology and saying you're sorry for things that really don't require an apology. You can be a divine, loving human and caring without apologizing every time something doesn't go well in your class. So what is this? Okay, when we look at, okay, well, what is that apology? It's likely an attachment to an outcome. Teacher wants to look like they never make a mistake. They want to look like they have all the answers, like they know what they're doing. They've memorized the class. I know my right from my left. I know what triangle is. I said the wrong thing. Okay, so it's attachment to an outcome. It's important to unpack these things if we really want to remove them from our teaching practice. So, like I was describing, wanting to be right and wanting to be perfect, two different things. And both of those are feed into the anti-pattern. And above all, even though it's listed lower, it's unconscious teaching. It's, okay, so you forgot your right from your left. Having to interrupt, using your own narrative to break the bubble in the class. It's not remembering what your stance is at that moment. It can also be an uncaring yoga studio worker. So in that last example, breathlessly walking in, saying your story, sorry, and providing the story of what was going on, and bringing your irritation or your flusteredness in, you'll hear that word again later, into the studio as you're walking in, is uncaring to what the environment is at that moment, and that you are you have people's attention. So it's uncaring. It can be indulgent. It's like, I got your attention, and let me tell you, I'm going to share with you what's really going on here that caused this class to start late. And then the person who was causing the lateness was getting dressed, and then they walk in, and now there's this energy without saying it that's sort of directed at that person for causing that problem. Okay, so we looked at the negative part, the anti-pattern. So how do we flip that into a pattern, a good thing of affirmation? Because things are going to go wrong. You are going to say the wrong words. People are going to make you late, or something's going to make class start late. We can't get rid of these things. So one affirmative pattern is to restate what you intended to say. And of course, improvise if you can't. And always breathe and just take a breath. Sometimes that's all that's needed to get yourself back on track. It's just, we tell others to do it. We can benefit from it too. So instead of inhale, reverse reverse triangle, it's just inhale, reverse warrior, reverse triangle, front leg straightens, just correct, right? Just rewrite it. And to be fair, safety is usually not a concern with these slight mix-ups. Your hours and hours of training will really help you know what to do in this. And it's not about apologizing. So just believe in yourself is what I'm saying here. Like, you have the training. Now, there could be a case where there really is a true apology needed for one individual. It's not going to be likely for the whole class. Find the right time to do it. It's probably not during class. Usually something like that, you gotta pull the person aside. People are not coming to yoga to be singled out for anything good or anything that is close to the drama of it. Anti-pattern of flustered. Okay, I hinted a little bit about flustered in the last example in the anti-pattern part of apology. Just to level set on what the definition of flustered means, a state of agitated confusion. Okay, so I don't know if you've ever felt like that in a yoga studio as being a cashier or the front desk person. And maybe when you were really new at teaching, you might have been in a confused state, but likely not agitated. Agitation is usually there's some other thing happening that's creating tension, but I want to leave it open to anything's possible. And as always, if you have examples you want to share with me about something that you experienced, I would love to hear them. Okay, so flustered, customer challenges, front desk problems like those pesky packages, it's a 30 pack. Well, no, I thought I bought a 40 pack. We don't sell 40 packs. Just as example, oh, it's for a different studio. I didn't realize that. All those things happen. There might be something in your internal world that has been bothering you that has nothing to do with being a yoga teacher. It could even be your journey to the yoga studio, traffic, a train, your other job, many external things. You could even have a wardrobe problem where, something was brand new and you tried it on and it was comfortable, but now you're halfway through class and it is really uncomfortable. That can cause agitation, and like the confusion is, I thought this was good and it's not, and I'm not sure if I can make it. I will make it, but I really don't want to, and all that. One other option might be, and there are many, but the other option I thought of was being unprepared for teaching that day. Being unprepared for class can end up being where you're in a flustered state, where it's like, oh, I didn't, now I'm in the, what did I do? And I didn't think it through. And now we're starting the left side and I can't remember what we did. I laugh because I've been there. It happens to all of us, most of us. And it's an anti-pattern. So what is this? Once again, it's attachment to outcomes. So we want things to go a certain way. We want to have the transactions at the desk go smoothly. We want to have an easy drive to teach yoga. We want our regular world during the day or other days to be good. We want to have a good life. We don't want to have internal strife that follows us into the studio and onto our mats. So attached to outcomes, looking at that in a harsh way, where it's like, I did have a bad day and somehow I expected to be perfect teaching yoga tonight. Why would I ever think I could be perfect after the day I've had? Okay. Like I was saying, being unprepared, failure to plan out your class well, and having, and maybe it's, the other thing I would encourage you to consider is that you always have a default class, that a default flow, if you do flow. Some hot yoga classes are the same 26 asanas every single time, but in some of these flow classes, you want to be creative, and some days it just, if you didn't plan, it's not going to be what you wanted. Have that default class ready for those really rough days that sometimes we don't plan it. And the unconsciousness, once again, and this begets that reactionary behavior that, oh, I'm sorry, or, oh, losing sight of things, of, oh, I brought this in the room. I'm really frustrated about something that happened at my other job. And now I'm supposed to be a coach to help these folks persevere or offer something encouraging. And I can't do it because I'm too deep in my own problem. I'm unconscious. The other thing is just losing complete sight of being a yoga teacher, not even about the stances. Like, you're so in your head that you didn't realize Shavasana, midway through class lasted way longer. We were in extended child's pose for 17 cycles of breath instead of 5 or whatever. And I say this with some playfulness because we have to laugh at ourselves. We're humans and we want to do our best, but sometimes things don't work out, and unconsciousness is a big part of it. Lack of curiosity. I think this is one of the greatest travesties of work, owning a business and interacting with people is not being curious about what's happening with someone else or what is unfolding before you. It's not necessarily about what's happening with a person, but like, what is the situation? And being curious about yourself too. It's like, why am I feeling like I'm driving to yoga and my shoulders are just up and I'm tense? Like, why is the tongue pressing on the roof of my mouth and I'm at a red light going to do my favorite thing, which is teach yoga? Like, why am I so tense? So just again, being curious will help. It's also with that exercise in consciousness. Just being curious will help with this anti-pattern of flustered. So let's flip that, turn that, transform that into a pattern of consciousness, mindfulness. And okay, that's easy to say. Well, just breathe. Start with breathing. If we're really stuck and you're feeling your shoulders are tense and you're like, oh, why am I feeling this way? Breathe through that first moment of noticing it, and everything will start to slow down a little and you'll be less flustered. It's just one simple thing to do. We tell our students to do it. We can do it. And reflection. I am going to say it many times. This is how you can move to a pattern of consciousness, even giving yourself just a short amount of time from when you're moving from the one thing you do to driving or walking to go teach yoga. Could you do some reflection before or after class? Why did that happen? Why did I show up like that today? And you have some space in your participant guide to get started on that. And if there's something that was an interaction, again, in that front desk stance, and if you need to follow up, and it could even be with a fellow yoga teacher or your studio owner, or you're the studio owner and you were tense with one of your teachers, follow up with a private apology, or just follow up if an apology is not needed. And just remember to make it authentic and be curious about what is needed. So let's integrate these two anti-patterns. There's some of the most common ones, but they're not all of them. And so when I say integrate, again, it's how do we apply this into our regular life? So number one, awareness of the most common anti-patterns. It's good. So this is great that we're doing this. That's not enough. You've got to practice the flip side of these anti-patterns. You got to practice the affirmative to really grow out of where you are now. If you want to grow into mindful resilience, you've got to practice. Section 4, disruptions. Okay, we've started with the foundational yoga teacher stance with the yogi yogini experience at the beginning. We've started to weave mindfulness through this. We've explored some of the anti-patterns and healthy patterns of mindful yoga teaching. And now we're going to look at disruptions, the things that can knock us off course faster than we can say, breathe. So with disruptions, know that I'm sharing some really common ones again, but there are so many out there. So, and again, if you would like to share some remarkable disruption that you've had as a teacher or experiencing class as a yogi or yogini, I would love to hear it. So just use my contact information at the end of your participant guide. There's so many disruptions in our classes. And let's face it, the nature of yoga, especially in the United States, might be different than other parts of the world, but it is sometimes in a gym, it is in a studio trying to innovate and do different things in the class. And on top of that, we have this pressure of technology all around us and can cause disruptions in our mindfulness because we're too much on our screens during the day. Define too much, I know, but people wanting to bring their phones in class. I mean, anything from a helicopter literally landing outside the studio on the grass. This happened to me a few months ago. I'm teaching yoga and there's an open grassy area on the side where there's another industrial building, and the owner of that industrial building owns a helicopter, And it was parked there when I arrived for class to teach it, and I was shocked. I'd never seen a helicopter parked on a lawn of, a property of in this industrial area. It was a small helicopter, but it was a legit helicopter. And during class, you could hear the rotors starting to move. I had the curtains open in the window, and it's taking off, and I'm trying to teach without distractions, and it was a huge disruption. So it could be a wardrobe malfunction. It could be some human doing something or not doing something during class. The heat, the thunderstorms, all those kinds of things. Okay. So disruptions abound, and the mindful, resilient yoga teacher draws on their foundations, remembers their intent, and can move past the disruption with as little fallout or impact as possible. So the first disruption is the free range yogi and yogini. Okay. I love this picture from North Arizona because it just feels so open and wide. And I think there is a situation here where some yogis or yoginis think it is a wide open place, even though they are in a structured class that has movement with breath, and we have collective energy in the class. A person can be teaching and there's someone in the back or even in the front, but usually these folks are a little bit in the back, and they're doing all manner of things other than what you're instructing. For example, a hot 26+2 class where you're doing specific asanas, and in the corner is a yogini doing her own vinyasa in between the asanas that you're cueing. Person's doing what you're saying, and they're adding on all this other stuff. And or you could be doing vinyasa. I've also had this happen where you're teaching a flow, and there's someone 5 meters from you. That seems like a lot. 2 meters from you, and they're doing a completely different flow. It's almost as if they are dancing to their own beat, and it has zero to do with any of the asanas you are cueing. And there are other people there, and it's super disrupting to the experience in that class. It's also hard for you to even get your cues out with something like this. So that's the situation. Someone who's just doing whatever they want, regardless of what's being, taught. And so what is this? All right, let's look at what this is first. And here's a lot. You remember our yoga teacher stance. I'm going to put that on the side here. And the possible remedies. So like, what are the stances you might use with this disruption? You might use keeper of the environment stance and check with your studio. And if you're a studio owner and you don't have a philosophy on free range yogis, yoginis, you need to have one and share it with your teachers, because this is going to happen. This is a very common disruption, and it would need follow-up if you are a teacher and you don't know what it is. So find out what it is. It might be divine, loving humans. So you don't call this person out during class and tell them that they're being disruptive or worse. Okay, don't admonish them. Don't make them feel, you're not at this point a teacher of a 3rd grade room. Okay. Coach is another stance that might be used. Encourage group movement. This is a stance I tend to draw on in those situations and say something like, we move with collective energy of the room. We move together with the breath. And teacher stance, obviously, depending on the studio, after class, you might need to have a conversation. And that would be as a teacher saying, look, in yoga class, in this yoga class, it's a flow class or whatever, we do it as a collective group. That's why people come to this class, to do it together. And I noticed you were not doing what we were doing, and it was really disruptive to the rest of the class. Can you tell me what you're thinking? And I'm making requests that when you come back, don't say if, but when you join us next time, try practicing with us. Something like that. I'm not here to give you the exact words. I'm here to give you a sense for what you could say. So thinking about this, free range yogis and yoginis, people doing their own thing, There's a couple different stances you can draw upon here when you're in a present mindful way to stop this kind of thing, this disruption from happening again, or to even make that affirmative to build a relationship with this person. You just don't know where it's going to go. Let's explore the disruption of malfunctions. You're teaching class and the heat goes out, the power goes out. What happens in that room, like what you do next, may depend on where you are in the studio and what kind of studio it is, and all of those things. So malfunctions is a huge topic, but it's really important to just have some basic conversation here about these situations. And your studio might have different resources. So if the power goes out and you have no windows and it's 8 o'clock at night, maybe there are some lights, some fairy lights, or mood battery powered things. I don't have to give you those types of remedies. What I'm looking for here is, again, we're going to apply yoga teacher stances to malfunctions. What if it's a wardrobe malfunction? Like you're having one or someone else is having one. Again, like you could have bought some new outfit or new sport top or whatever, and it started out comfortable and it quickly became uncomfortable. These are all malfunctions. So let's look at what this is from the yoga teacher stance. When something goes wrong, like the power or the heat or the music, music is a real common one. We'll stop for a minute. Speaking of music, I had taught in a studio where sometimes there are other events going on in the same studio. And so the malfunction is that the music was changed for the other event. It wasn't meant to be a malicious thing, but like they didn't realize they were changing it for my yoga class. And so suddenly I have my playlist and now I'm listening to now we're doing something completely different. That's another malfunction that I've had recently that it just threw me for a curveball. Music is one of those that it really can, because it's connected with technology, and technology is just one of those things that can dog us for sure. So teacher stances for malfunctions. Back to keeper the environment. Is it still comfortable for everyone? Okay, are we preserving the environment if we persevere? Safety officer. Is it safe for everyone? How could it be more safe? What is the studio's plan when something like this happens? And then that divine loving human. Don't be critical of yourself or of the universe when these things happen. So much is out of your control. Let's look at the disruption of nature. Oh, there's so many. And I would love to hear any of your nature disruption ideas, or not ideas, but experiences. A violent thunderstorm, or in the case of our background here, a dust storm hits. The studio has windows and it's hailing outside, pelting the window. Or what if there are windows outside and you have Canadian geese that linger nearby by the pond, and they see themselves in the reflection of the window. Yes, this has happened. And they waddle over to the window and they put their little bill right by the window and just start talking to themselves in front of the window, and it's sticking their bills right there, and it's very charming and adorable and hugely distracting. So you get the idea. Nature, really out of your control. And we like to connect yoga to nature and nature in yoga. There's all kinds of retreats in open air places, and we're in Bali and Nosara, Costa Rica, and Italy and Hawaii. Nature is a big part of it, but it also creates these huge disruptions. So let's take a look at the yoga stances that can help you with these disruptions. So these are some possible remedies. So again, we've got the yogi yogini experience in the middle, and then the yoga teacher stances surrounding it. Keeper the environment, once again, is it still comfortable for everyone? This is close to malfunction, but it's like, oh, this is nature. Are we still comfortable here? If it's thundering and you're doing outdoor yoga and lightning, probably not a good idea to continue the class. It's not even about comfort. It might be mental comfort. It's about what is safe. And that leads us to safety officer. Is it safe for everyone? Well, the geese are outside and they're just pitter-pattering over by the window. It's okay. And then using that coach, encouraging your class not to feel bad about being distracted. It's like, yes, there's a big thunderstorm going on out there, and we are very interested in it. And we are also students of yoga, and we are here in this room moving with breath. Breath is the foundation of our class. And there's so many ways you can do it to draw people back to what you're doing on the mat without making them feel bad. Noticing that your mind is wandering is a good thing. And guide. Again, drawing attention back to yoga and the present moment. And coach and yoga guide there are very similar. Coach is encouraging, the guide are the words. We move with breath, we focus on the present moment. Let's pause, maybe even the guide says, okay, we're going to pause in child's pose while this hailstorm just rains on us. And as a guide, I know how to pull out a cool meditation to use right now. It's going to rock. And because you're a playful and curious yoga teacher in these stances, you can gracefully move from that to the other. Let's integrate these disruptions. I said disruptions, that's a distraction and a disruption, a disruption. Let's take a look at these distractions and integrate them into our entire practice here, what we're trying to do in this class. Integration of the disruptions topic. So weaving together yogi yogini experience with teacher stances, with mindfulness and patterns, affirmative ways to be a yoga teacher. Clearly, it's part of the human experience to have these disruptions. They're not going away anytime soon. They're just probably going to keep changing as to what manifests in your class. And I encourage you to just focus on the yogi and yogini experience. And if you have your participant guide open, follow along in this summary. I've created a list of 4 points about integration here with finish the sentence so you can follow along and write in the rest of these sentences, because writing and thinking about it, you might remember it better. And these are important points. So that number 1 is focus on the yogi and yogini experience. And the second one, practice awareness of your stances and what they mean to you. It doesn't matter if you make different words for them. Maybe there's some other stance that you use all the time that's not here. Please share with me what it is. I would love to consider it as part of my curriculum. And just use these stances really as a foundation. Practice. Use your homework to practice. And number 3, practice reflection for growth and release. So awareness, mindfulness, great. Reflection is where it really happens, but you've got to make time to be still and focus only on this work and look at what are the stances. Rewind a situation, maybe apply integral theory to something that you're still holding on to. And then reflection can help you release these things. When you are able to mindfully unpack what is bothering you or what you want to do better next time in a way that you can do it curiously and then release the negative parts to it. So you're walking onto your mat with affirmative, positive yoga teacher stance. And discuss the boundaries and policies with your yoga teacher, your yoga studio owner. And if you're the owner, establishing them. It's worth your time to ask your studio owner about these. And it's worth your time as a studio owner to establish these. Some might be boundaries, some might be philosophies, and some might have to be actual policies, depending on what the situations are. This doesn't mean you have to know everything all the time, but it does mean, okay, we get so many disruptions in this particular area, it's time for us to establish as a business how we're going to handle these things. Okay, that was a lot of information and instruction. Let's take a pause and soak in some of the benefits of the work we've just done. We have to practice what we encourage others to do. And so I'm asking you now to pause your video and just take a few breaths, close your eyes even. And if you fall asleep, that's okay. You probably needed a little nap. And when you wake up, we'll be here and come back for the close of our class. And just take a pause and soak it in. Here's our final section on integration and optional homework. Remember at the beginning of class, I encouraged that this was an invitation to growth rather than an obligation. And so this homework is part of that invitation. And it's also how you can begin to practice awareness and reflection if it's not part of your current way of operating as a yoga teacher. Maybe refreshing something that you really do practice regularly. So looking at participant guide, we've got two different types of homework. Number one is the stances homework. There are some reflection prompts in there. This is about the next time you attend yoga class as a student, whether it's in person or online, to look at what that was like. The other thing you can do is look at, when you do teach a class, reflect back on the stances you used. What was that like? What would you, it's not always about what could I have done better, but it's just, these are the stances I used. That's interesting. And just being curious about why you used what you did. Why did that teacher use what they did? Try to leave the judgment out and stick to the observations. The last part is this integral theory tool practice. This is at all interesting to you, this tool. Give it a try with one of the situations that you've encountered. And it doesn't have to be a yoga teacher situation. You could pick something from life. It could be a work thing, a relational thing. It's, why is this still bothering me? Or why is this something I keep thinking about? It's not bothering me in a negative way, but I just keep thinking about this opportunity, or this, I'm fixated on this thing. Why is this? Just unpack it using integral theory. Thank you for joining me for this class. Remember again, the invitation here to change and to reflect. This is just the beginning of your journey. Even if you've been teaching for a very long time, focusing specifically on having a mindful and resilient yoga teacher practice doesn't happen overnight. We have to take some of our own advice that we give to yogis and yoginis about being persistent and focused. And I encourage you to keep using your participant workbook in the future and use it to reflect back on what we've covered here, because we did explore a lot of ground. Here's my contact information. I'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you have feedback for this class, I would love to hear it. Udemy has a great feedback form that you'll receive. Please fill it out so we can make this class better for the next person. And if you have some stories you want to share, I would love to hear them. And of course, some resources in the form of links for you. Thank you, and I wish you peace.